Good morning, everyone. My name is Stephanie Dalton. I am a conservation coordinator here at North Coast County Water District. Joining us today is our instructor, Loretta O'Brien. The class today is called Waterwise Edible Gardening, and we'll be going over a few slides before we get started. Okay, and next. Okay, all attendees are muted by default. The instructor will pause periodically for questions. So we would like you to use either the raise hand function or the Q&A. And the Q&A, I'll be able to read the questions for Loretta after every section. So there will also be a period of time after the class where we will have more opportunity for questions. And just so you know, the webinar is being recorded and it will be made available on the BOSCA website. So if you miss any details, you'll be able to rewatch it. Next. The Bay Area Water Supply and Conservation Agency is our partner in this webinar. They are made up of 26 member agencies that purchase water from the SFPUC, and collectively those agencies serve 1.8 million people. Their goal is similar to ours, to provide high quality water at a fair price. Next. Okay, so outdoor water use represents the single largest untapped opportunity for water conservation in the BOSCA service area. Outdoor water use reduction through the use of water efficient plants and innovative techniques can help conserve water and ensure that future water supply needs of our community are met. Next. Additional ways to save. So these are some of the rebate programs that are offered through BOSCA. You would need to check with your own agency. Here in North Coast County Water District, we serve the city of Pacifica. So for our rebate programs, they might differ from our neighboring agencies. We do offer the Lawn Be Gone program and the Rain Barrel program. Both are great. And you can visit BOSCA's website to learn more about it. Next. Here are two new programs, the Smart Controller Rebate and Installation Program and the Rain Garden Rebate Program, which is also offered by North Coast County Water District. You can learn more about these rebates at bayareaconservation.org. Next. And we will be having our last landscape class this June 7th. So between today and June 7th, there are going to be 4 more that you can join. So the next one is May 18th, the pervious pavement. So please visit the website, bayareaconservation.org, to register. Next. bayareagardening.org is a great resource. It's very helpful with deciding which plants fit your, your garden for the best climate. There's a gallery of landscape photos for inspiration, as well as a watering guide to help you determine how much water certain plants need based on where you live. You can also get to this website by visiting the BOSCA website as well, but it is bayareagardening.org. Next. Okay, and we'll have our instructor take it away, Loretta.
Okay, great. Thank you so much, everybody. My name is Loretta O'Brien. I am the designer and co-founder of Pacifica Gardens, which is a local to the coast side food growing project. We're a nonprofit, and we've been here since 2008. If you have an opportunity to go visit our website, pacifica-gardens.org, and take a look at what we've been doing over the last few years, it might be of interest to you. We've been practicing growing things on the coast side. So today's presentation is not only going to be Waterwise backyard edible gardening, but also how you can grow on the coast side. So we have a unique growing climate here, and so we're going to talk a little bit more specifically about different crops that grow better here on the coast side. So some keys to Waterwise gardening in general is to plan your garden to minimize your water use. Okay, so we'll take a look at some of those ideas in a minute. And by improving your soil and creating living soil, you will also save water. We can use some planting methods that will minimize our water use. And if we water effectively and efficiently, we can also reduce the amount of water that we use. And if we protect our soil throughout the year, we will also use less water over the year. So let's take a look at some of the garden plan options that we have. If you're new to gardening, you might be building your garden right now. It is May, although it's hard to tell here on the coast side. It's very foggy right now. But you might be building your garden. So if you're still building, you might want to take into some of these considerations. So things that you want to consider: your garden size, how much of your yard do you want to dedicate to your edible growing? The location of your garden beds, the hours of sunlight, shade, wind, and urban life. The types of garden beds that you want to plant. Do you want to plant right into the ground? Do you want to use containers? Do you want to, what kind of bed sizes do you want? And then we also too want to make sure that we create a watering plan. When we're first starting to install our edible garden, it's important from my point of view, and I have plenty of experience doing this, to start small. So set yourself up for success. So if you're new to edible gardening, especially here on the coast side, it's probably a good idea not to dedicate your entire backyard to your edible garden. Take a few beds, or create a couple of small beds, maybe 3 by 3, and then you can add more beds as you have success. We need to take into consideration hours of sunlight. In the foggier climates, this becomes very important. In the sunnier climates, we can quote, full sun is like 6 hours of sun per day. We need to kind of look at areas of our yards that get about 8 hours, okay, when we talk about during the main growing season. So when we think about the main growing season, we're really looking at April through October, and then we can go into the fall and winter months, and that's a whole different kind of look about, for your fall garden. So if possible, choose a southwest location for your vegetable garden. Okay, so southwest, of course, in the northern hemisphere, right? So get your compass out and kind of look and see if you can find a place where you can put a couple of garden beds on the southwest location. We need to consider here on the coast side, wind, okay? So wind can be a little bit hard on vegetables, also salt air, so we have to take those into consideration as well. If you live very, very close to the ocean, there are only a few vegetable crops that will grow well in the saltier climates, okay? We have a lot of urban wildlife, including our own urban wildlife, dogs and cats. Consider deer and gophers and those types of things when you are planting your garden. So we need to kind of fence our garden beds from our dogs, chickens, goats, and keeping the deer out as well. Basically, there are 3 types of garden beds: raised beds, in-ground beds, and containers. Raised beds are going to allow easy access for the gardeners. This is my personal favorite. I've done in-ground beds for many years. I'm getting older. I like the raised beds. I have the ability to create optimal soil texture. I have the ability to add gopher screen, and it's much easier to add an irrigation drip system to raised beds rather than in-ground beds. In-ground beds, however, have their advantages. Right, and with the in-ground bed, the plant root systems have full access to the soil. They are inexpensive and a great way to get started. They are long-lasting, okay, and they're easy to integrate into ornamental garden design, and your crops can wander. So in-ground beds are often good for some of those crops that we like to grow, like pumpkins, that like to wander, okay? So pumpkins are a little harder to contain in raised beds. So in-ground beds are a good place to plant your pumpkins. So container gardening, okay? So container gardening is great for people who have small spaces. We can create edible gardens on our decks and patios They are going to allow for more physical accessibility for the gardener. And it's very easy to control gophers and moles, although dogs tend to walk right on by and eat your strawberries. Containers and small beds placed on non-porous, all right, concrete patios are less water efficient. So we need to take that into consideration. So if you have your containers and you're putting them on concrete, okay, that is going to create a runoff. So we'd like to make sure that when we do put our pots, either on our decks, that we kind of can figure out a way to deal with the runoff. Okay, so I like clay pots and wooden planters. They seem to hold the water better than the plastic containers. So the size of your beds are going to be important. So we'd like to have a minimum of a 3 by 3 foot by 3 foot bed for optimal plant synergy. And beds that are wider than 4 feet are difficult to work in, okay, whether they're raised or in the ground. I used to plant 5 foot wide in-ground beds, and that was fine, when I was really young. And if you're tall, that's also fine. But anything larger than 4 foot wide is kind of difficult for the gardener, and you end up having to put you end up having to create a path in your garden bed, which actually compacts the soil and is kind of interrupts the bed itself. So smaller beds and containers can be used for leaf crops and smaller plants. So if you are a container gardener, if you're going to be growing in large pots or barrels, some of the other crops like pumpkins, the larger ones, the ones that are going to produce a lot of fruit, zucchini, those kinds of things may not do that well. That said, in a wine barrel, I grew huge zucchini a few years ago. So obviously experiment. Path space is going to be important. We need to make sure that when we're designing our edible garden that we allow enough room to work. So this picture on the right, the paths are wide enough to work in, as in the gardener can get in there. But what if you want to bring in a wheelbarrow of compost? Wheelbarrow will not fit. Okay, so having had that experience, we just want to make sure that if you want to use a wheelbarrow or some sort of a garden cart, that you do create enough path space. Okay, path spaces should be porous. Okay, we do not want to concrete over our path space. Again, that is a water runoff problem, and we don't want to go there. Okay, porous path space are going to prevent water runoff and allow rainwater to soak into the aquifer. Okay, whatever you do, don't use concrete. So create a watering plan. Decide how you're going to water, okay, before you start your planting your garden bed. For backyard gardeners, consider hand watering. Depending on how big your garden is, hand watering is a perfectly sound way of watering your garden. I personally like hand watering because I can specialize my watering to the individual plants. Plus, I'm visiting my plants every day. I can see what's happening to them. Also, we can consider drip irrigation and soaker hoses, or a combination. At the big garden, we actually do a combination. We do have a drip irrigation system that gives us 10 minutes a day for every bed. And then our volunteers water the thirstier crops on an as-needed basis. And that way we're not overwatering some beds or underwatering other beds. Overhead sprinklers, manual and automatic, are prone to water waste, evaporation, and can promote mildew and fungal growth on your plants. So overhead sprinklers, yeah, we want to avoid those. Whatever you do, choose, be creative, okay? So allow freedom for your root systems to grow deep in the soil. Make sure that your beds are accessible to the gardeners that will be working in the gardener. Make sure you have good drainage, okay? Make sure that your beds are easy to irrigate, and implement Waterwise strategies. This image on the right is one of our favorite images in 2015, just a little plug for the garden and AmeriCorps. We had an AmeriCorps team come and help us do some infrastructure upgrades. And one of them was to help us create an herb spiral from quote urbanite, which was just concrete. This area of the garden has very poor drainage, so we needed to raise up our herb spiral, our herb garden. So they helped us create this amazing herb spiral. Let's talk a little bit about soil preparation. So we want to make sure that our soil has sufficient organic matter, okay? So that we have living organisms that will hold water and provide optimal growth, all right, for our plants. We want to improve the condition of our soil, all right? So improving the condition of our soil is an important part to Waterwise gardening. The goal is to create soil that is living, okay? So the best garden soil is going to be a mixture of 3 soil particles: sand, silt, and clay, okay, plus about 5 to 10% of organic matter and living organisms. So our worms, our fungi, our bacteria that are going to help feed the root systems of the plant are important. So when we first start our garden, we may not have quote living soil. And so our objective will be over time to create that living soil. For our in-ground beds, we want to examine if you're going to plant inside, all right, if you're going to plant right straight into the ground. We can see our image here on the right is us digging a bed right into the Pacifica Gardens soccer field, okay, using a double digging technique. So if you are going to do in-ground beds, you're going to have to take a look at your soil. Is it clay, silt, or sand? Do we have optimum soil? Or do we need to do some things that can break up clay soil or make sandy soil less, drain less, okay? Perhaps we want to test our soil, okay? And definitely, I always recommend that people at least test to find out how much organic matter you have in your soil. It's your organic matter that is going to help you create and build living soil. So initially, you will need to break up your compaction. We do want to move toward, no-till, low-till type gardening. So we don't want to be digging up every single year. But initially, if this is the first time this area of your garden has been an edible garden, you're going to need to loosen it up, right? And you can do that by a double digging technique, right? That will give you about 24 inches of loose soil. And then we're going to add some organic compost, about 1 inch, okay? Raised beds, all right? You can build your raised beds out of numerous things. Ours are built out of wood. There's lots of different options. We want to fill our beds with purchased, all right, sandy loam, quote, topsoil from a reliable garden supply source. So this is my plug for Lingso. Lingso is garden supplies in San Carlos. It's my go-to place. Very, very reliable. They have very good products for raised beds, and they actually will just also sell sandy loam all on its own. You can make your own if you want, or you can purchase one of their soil mixes. There's 2 soil mixes that I find are very good for raised beds, and that is the vegetable mix, soil mix, and the essential soil mix. Okay, so, but in any case, new raised beds with new topsoil are going to need improvement, right, with living organic compost. And we want to add about 1 inch of compost. Generally, raised beds will not require digging, okay, if the soil is properly cared for. Now, if you grow your first crop, your summer crop, and you pull everything out at the end of the fall and you just leave your bed to grow weeds or just lie bare, you might find that the soil will compact itself over the winter and you will have to do a little bit of loosening. But if you plant some cover crops in the wintertime, not only will you save water, but you'll also improve your soil as well. For pots and small containers, we're going to need to fill with purchased soil mixes that are specifically designed for container gardening. Okay, so there are several of those bagged options. There are several really good organic ones. Also, another plug for Linkso, they have a potting mix that is specifically designed for container gardening. Or you can make your own. And I've made my own container soil for many, many years. I just take my, my regular soil out of my garden, usually where one of my dogs have dug up, and I mix it with about half and half of the sandy loam with compost, and I make my own compost. So just so we know, generally container gardening requires more compost and will often require a little bit more fertilizer. Okay, because the roots, the space for the root system is limited. So we have to take that into consideration as well. I always strive to use the minimal amount of amendments and inputs and fertilizers. I think it's important for us to work on developing our soil so that we don't need so many so many inputs. But at the very beginning, we have some options, and we're probably going to need some. I like alfalfa meal as an amendment to the beds. Okay, it's easily purchased as an organic fertilizer. Kelp is another one. Liquid kelp. I like using liquid kelp sort of as a foliar fertilizer for some of my plants. And they can be added as needed for the soil conditions and the plants. Okay. And if you're really wanting to work into being a fully sustainable gardener, consider creating your own compost tea and worm castings, and they can be created in your own garden. Soil protection. One of the things that we really want to emphasize here is protection of the soil. The garden bed soil should not be exposed or empty for long periods of time. Okay, empty beds lose moisture, and then when we lose moisture, we waste water, and we find ourselves then having to add a ton of water to the garden bed before we plant again. Okay, so not only are we wasting water, but our living organisms are going to die. Okay, and we don't want that to happen. So at the big garden, what we do is after we transplant something, even in our cooler climate, this is cabbage over here, purple cabbage on the right, we cover the garden bed for a short period of time until the plants stabilize and they get growing, and the leaves get big enough so we can remove the shade net. Okay, so before we talk about compost, do we have any questions that we want to address right now? Nope. Okay. All right, let's talk about compost. Compost is going to be an important part of your Waterwise garden. Okay, so, and making your own compost seems like, oh gee, I can't do that, but it really is quite easy once you learn how to do it. Okay, so composting in your backyard is the #1 thing that you can do to improve your soil, grow healthy vegetables, and save water. Okay, so here on the right, we have education opportunities for the kids in Pacifica to come to the garden and learn about composting. Our volunteer, Cass Lachek, is our resident, a master composter. He's showing the children the worms that you find in a worm bin, which of course is always a highlight. So back to composting. So we talk about composting, this idea of growing your soil. Home composting will reduce waste. So that takes those kitchen scraps that you might, dump into your quote compost bin, or hopefully not, are grinding down your garbage disposal. We want to eliminate our waste. Home compost is full of beneficial organisms, bacteria, fungi, and earthworms. Just want to a little bit of a comment on home compost versus bagged compost or some other composts that you can get. Your home compost, if you've done it correctly, is already living. It has beneficial bacteria, fungi, and earthworms in there, or the little red wrigglers are in there already. Sometimes our bag soils, those composts, while they have lots of organic matter in them and some valuable things, they don't really have a lot of life in them, or they have no life in them because they have been heated. Right? And they have to be heated in order to reduce the possibility of pathogens. So, but your home compost is already living, okay? The reason also too, when you're creating your own compost, you can select the materials for your compost piles. What do we mean by that? You can take the things that you don't necessarily want in your compost, like the thorny things, right? And you can just, put those in your green waste bin. You can also enhance your compost by adding, specific grains and different carbon sources, right? You can actually manipulate your compost if you are growing it yourself. And like I said, it's easy once you get started. Most counties and even some water districts will also have training programs for learning how to compost at home. So what exactly is compost? In a nutshell, compost is decomposed organic matter. It is a natural process of recycling organic material, such as leaves and vegetable scraps, into a rich soil amendment that gardeners fondly nickname black gold. Okay. So a good compost is going to provide nitrogen and carbon, the sugars and carbohydrates and other nutrients to grow our healthy organic vegetables. Compost reduces needs for chemical fertilizers. Compost reduces the need for any outside inputs, okay? So that way, once you have really good compost that you can use, sometimes for some crops, that's all you're going to need, okay? Compost is going to improve your soil, right, which is going to help you grow healthy plants, reduces pests and diseases. And of course, compost saves water. So let's take a look at some planting techniques that are going to help save water, okay, and improve plant growth. So planting techniques also one of the bullet points for our Waterwise gardening, okay. So I'm going to have my vegetable garden. What should I, should I plant by seed? Should I plant by seeds or a little transplant? How do I know when to transplant? And we'll talk a little bit about in-bed spacings that will help reduce water consumption as well. I like to propagate seeds, okay? So propagating your own seeds reduces water usage. How is that possible? So if I've got my little beans, which are over here on the right, and I put them in my garden bed, and I know that my in-bed spacing for my beans is 6 to 8 inches, and I plant one bean every 6 to 8 inches, I am now going to be watering the soil in between each of those beans until they germinate. And not all of them will germinate. So I'm now kind of wasting water and a little bit of space as well. But if I flat my beans or whatever crop it is into 4-inch pots or into a wooden flat, I grow up my seedlings, I improve my germination rate, and then I can transplant the healthiest plants. Okay, so I can eliminate if I see one of my seedlings that doesn't look very healthy, I can just, compost it and transplant the healthier seedlings, and I end up with a healthier garden in the long run. Okay, so in addition to saving water, okay, actually flattening your own seeds is going to give you more choices of vegetables. So if you look at some of these seed catalogs, Peaceful Valley Farm Supplies, one of my favorite, Territorial, one of my favorite, True Leaf Market, one of my favorite. All of these seed companies have like all different kinds of vegetable choices. And even though our nurseries around here do their very best to fully stock, we don't always get the varieties that we might want. So when you propagate your own seeds, you get more choices. You also get control over your planting schedule. You can plant when you want to plant, not when when the seedling is ready. So if I'm purchasing from a nursery, I bring it home like, wow, I've got to get that in right away. Maybe your bed isn't ready, or maybe you would like to have a succession plant a little bit. Okay, so you want to plant, some kale early on, and then in the late season, you want to plant kale again. You might not be able to find seedlings then. So if you grow your own, you actually have control over your planting schedule. Most of the time you're going to end up with healthier seedlings. Okay. And also it's a huge sense of accomplishment. Now, if you're starting, all right, if this is your first garden, maybe you want to, get some transplants from one of our local nurseries and go that way. And then as you get better, then you can propagate your own seeds. I think it'll be, you'll find that it feels really good. And again, it's a huge sense of accomplishment. So when am I going to transplant my seedlings? So I'm going to grow up my seedlings or purchase my seedlings, and they are ready to transplant into the garden when there are at least 2 true leaves. So when we first take a look at things coming up, this image on the right, this is kale, I think. These are the cotyledons. These are the first little leaves that come up. This is not a true leaf. Okay, so what we want to do is we were going to transplant our seedling when we have the true leaves. Okay, and they're at least 2 to 3 inches tall. The best time of day to transplant is in the early evening. Okay, when the air is cool. Now, on a day like today, when it's foggy, right now is also a good time. One of the things we want to avoid is transplanting into a new garden bed during the heat of the day or when there is strong direct sun. The little transplants, they actually need to be transplanted in a cool environment and into a moist environment. One of the most common mistakes that the beginning gardener makes is transplanting a seedling into soil that is either too wet, like as in muddy, right, or too dry. We want to make sure that the soil that we transplant into is moist, okay? So put your hand in the soil, squeeze the soil. If it stays in a little bit of a ball, it's good to go. If it's ringing with wet, it's too wet. And if the soil crumbles in your hand, it's too dry. Those are the ways that we can tell whether the soil has the right moisture before we transplant our seedlings. Vegetables have different spacing requirements. So by knowing the spacing requirements and how big they're going to get, we can actually adjust what we call the in-bed spacing. And knowing the proper spacing for each of our crops is going to allow for the most efficient use of this, not only of the garden space and use of water. So our backyard gardens are not farm fields. We do not need to drive a tractor down, the rows of the vegetables. We are in smaller spaces. We're usually in a bed that we're leaning into. So we don't need to plant things in rows of, 8 inches apart, in rows 8 inches apart, with the rows being 36 inches wide. We don't need that because we're not driving anything down our garden beds. Okay, so that means we can use this hexagonal spacing method. This hexagonal spacing or hex pattern was introduced by John Jevons at Ecology Action. And so this is a terrific way of optimizing your garden space, but then also too, it's going to help reduce water. Okay, so when we use this system, as the plant grows, see, I've got this little this hex system here, right? Say this is lettuce. As my lettuce grows, I know, oh, okay, now I'm filling in these spaces here. Now the actual plant itself is creating shade over the soil, and that will help reduce the amount of water that we need. And it will also help reduce weeds as well. So that's always an important thing. Kind of creates its own living mulch. So using a proper spacing in a hex pattern will help us optimize the use of the garden space, but then also reduce the amount of water that we use. So I created this chart. This is not an exhaustive chart, but these are the basic vegetables or crops that will grow well in our cooler climate, and the spacing. Okay, so we can see that cabbage is going to need a lot more space than, oh, I don't know, beets. Okay, so we can plant a lot of beets in that hex pattern. You know, and carrots, you know, are 2 to 3 inches, and we have these different in-bed spacing requirements here. And again, for a real exhaustive look at all the in-bed spacing, we can take a look at John Jevons' book called How to Grow More Vegetables. Okay. So hopefully if anybody needs that, they can screenshot it, or we can take a look at it again. Okay. All right, so I think there was a question. So we have a question before we talk about watering.
Just to provide the names of the seed companies at the end of the presentation.
Absolutely, absolutely. Okay, yes, I will. I'll happily do that. We've already talked a little bit about our watering techniques, but okay, let's take a look. When we are when we're watering our garden beds and all the things in our yard, we want to have take into consideration the time of the day and how much water each thing needs. Is it prone to fungus? Does it not do well with overhead watering? Those types of things. But the most important thing is keeping the soil moist, all right? Keeping the soil moist is essential to maintaining plant and soil life. So we think of watering the soil, and initially we think to ourselves, wow, that seems like a lot of water. But no, actually, if we keep our soil moist and living over time, right, we actually end up using less water. Okay, so choosing our water strategy is going to depend on the size of our garden, the types of our beds, and the abilities of the gardener. You know, at home, I've been gardening here on the coast side for 21 years. And in fact, even when I lived in Fremont, I always watered by hand. Okay, but the most important thing is water when your soil needs it. Again, we'd like to check the soil 4 to 6 inches deep, okay, after we're watering to make sure that the soil is evenly moist. And again, we use that same strategy that we were using when we're determining whether the soil was moist enough to transplant into. Dig down in there, take a little handful of soil, squeeze it. If it stays kind of like in a little ball, but doesn't like drip water, then that's an evenly moist bed. If the soil is crumbling in your hands, you know, then that probably will need water. One of the things on the coast side that can be a little bit deceptive is because we have so much fog, sometimes we'll go out in the morning and we'll look at our soil, and our soil surface is quite wet. And we think, oh, everything's good to go. But check anyway, because sometimes as you go down 4 to 6 inches, we'll see that the soil is actually a little bit crumbly and could use a little bit of water, okay? So just making sure that we do check, okay? It's important to not just go out there with our hose and spray everything and, you know, in a big hurry. That can potentially be a waste of water. Okay, so in-ground beds, as we mentioned before, and raised beds are easily fitted to drip irrigation. Okay, pots and small containers are easily watered by hand. I do know people who have all of their pots hooked up to drip irrigation. My brother was this like drip irrigation, you know, fanatic, and he had his entire garden like that. For me, that was annoying because I don't really like all those tubes everywhere, but it's quite possible. And you can use a combination of the two. The advantages of hand watering. Hand watering allows for even watering. Okay, so if we have a nice wand, we can water evenly. Drip irrigation, it drips down depending on the water needs of the particular crop. Sometimes some plants get more water than others. So we can get nice even watering with our hand watering. Hand watering allows the gardener to adjust easily the amount of water depending on the plant needs and the weather conditions. Disadvantages, if you're not paying attention, the hand watering can limit, right, and promote shallow root growth. That's why it's important if you're hand watering to dig down 6 inches, make sure that you're getting a deep water. And depending on the time of day that you water, there's always a little bit more water evaporation. Okay? But if you water at the right time of the day, the water evaporation will be minimal. Use hand watering nozzles and wands that allow control and direction of your water stream. One of my favorite ones is the actual the watering nozzle that Bosca has, right? This one up here, this little one here. It's a great one. It has lots of different modalities on it. You can kind of turn it and get and change and adjust your stream. This one by Dram is also one of my favorites. It also has the ability to control the stream. And this one also by Dram is just a single thing up and down, right, for larger areas. And we can sort of the fan nozzle. These are hand watering nozzles that work really well. So we want to use a setting that delivers gentle spray to the soil around the plants. Okay, so we want to water at the end of the day. Okay, if you're hand watering. Now on the coast side, we can actually water probably around 3 o'clock if it's foggy. Okay, but the best time of day to water is about 3 hours before sunset. This will reduce evaporation. And the late watering will allow enough time for the leaves to dry before sunset. Okay, so one of the things that we don't want to do is hand water right at sunset, especially in our foggier climate and our foggier days. We end up with fungus growing on our plants, especially our zucchini and sometimes the beans as well. We want to avoid strong streams of water directly applied to the plants or the pots. Occasionally we get into a hurry and, oh, heck, I'm just going to turn that thing on full blast. Well, not only do you waste water, you interrupt your root system and cause some erosion. Okay, we don't want to do that. And of course, we want to avoid watering paths, patios, and decks. Okay, so that's why I really like setting up the wand system. So I have the ability to have a little valve on it. When I move from one bed to another, I don't just keep the water running and spraying all over the place. I turn it, the valve turns off, and then I go to the next bed or the next pot. Drip irrigation is efficient, okay? All right, so it will almost completely eliminate that water evaporation. Right, so most of the time we're going to set up our drip irrigation systems so that they go on in the either at the end of the day, okay, or in the early morning. The drip irrigation promotes deep watering of plants, okay, which is going to increase the depth of the root growth. And it's going to give you some freedom from your garden if you go on vacation. It will allow you to water your garden when you are not home. The disadvantages of drip irrigation, maybe mentioned a bit ago, uneven watering. Okay, so depending on the plants, sometimes the drip line, right, will drop down, and if the plant is too far away, sometimes some plants get more water than others. Okay, so that is the disadvantage. The lines tend to spring leaks. So that is one thing, unless you are really into repairing. I personally find drip irrigation annoying because I don't like repairing all the leaks, okay? The drip irrigation makes the hex in-bed transplanting a little bit more challenge. And drip irrigation can be a little bit expensive. Okay, so everybody has a kind of a preference. Some people swear by drip irrigation, others swear by hand watering. When you're first starting, if you're just doing your 1 or 2 beds, I would probably just work on hand watering. That way you're going to learn about the needs of your plant. You're going to be able to look at your soil on a regular basis. You'll be able to tell what's moist and how moist it is, and you'll kind of, be right there. And then as your garden gets bigger, you might want to invest in drip irrigation, especially for some of the bigger plants, like your big fava beans and, your corn and even your pumpkins. They do well with the drip irrigation. And lastly, we want to make sure when we're talking about our watering strategy is to mulch. Okay, so have plenty of organic mulch on hand. Here on the coast side, it becomes a little bit of a challenge because we don't have a lot of deciduous trees. So, but we can use straw. Okay, and we use straw at the garden. We also use some wood chips depending on what crop it is. We want to, you can gather or purchase mulch. Straw, like I said, is a nice one. Leaves, if you have access, if you have a relative that lives in the East Bay that has, a maple tree or an oak tree, maybe you can steal some from them. Pine straw is fine. We have pine needles here. They do well. And if you want to purchase a coconut coir, that is a good mulch as well. Okay, so before we go on to crops, let's have a look. Do we have any questions that we want to address right now?
Yeah, we have a question. I heard mulch should be pulled away from trunks. Is that the same for vegetables?
Pulled away from trunks?
Yeah, of trees.
Okay. Yes, so that is true about the trees. For the vegetables, I don't like to push it up all the way onto the stem. I like to have it right just below the kind of like maybe 1 or 2 inches. It kind of doesn't really matter. If you notice that you're getting a little bit too wet, maybe you have a little bit of fungus or something like that, pull it away. Let me just go to this previous slide here. This is cabbage that are mulched, and you can see that the mulch there is just really right up to the leaves. We're not lifting up the cabbage and pushing the mulch in. We're just really protecting the soil. The soil that is immediately beneath the cabbage leaves themselves will be protected by the leaves. Okay, so we don't have to worry about that. Hopefully that helps. Okay. All right, so crops. Now, the different vegetables, we are focusing on the coast side here. Okay, and I just want to let coastside gardeners know that you have an opportunity for pretty much some really nutritious vegetables year round. Okay, and even though we struggle with things like tomatoes and basil and melons and peppers and everything, we can grow tons of really, really nutritious vegetables, and then we can go to the farmer's market for the rest of things. Okay, all right. So when we can plant vegetables that are part of the list of quote warm weather crops or summer crops. Okay, so our main growing season is going to be similar to the sunnier climates, kind of in that April to October. We can plant root crops in succession throughout the summer and into the fall, which is terrific. So if you love beets or carrots or radishes, all of these crops can be planted in succession so that you have those vegetables throughout the main growing season, but then also too into the fall. Leaf crops do very, very well on the coast side. So all of your lettuces, your kales and collards and spinach, they all they grow very well, and you can plant both summer and fall crops. And again, the cool weather crops we can plant in the fall. Okay, so crops that are going to grow well on the coast. Here is our list. Now, this is not an extensive list. This is not an exhaustive list. Okay, so for a comprehensive crop list and good planting times, I'd like to tell people to go to Pam Pierce's book called Golden Gate Gardening. Pam Pierce is a longtime San Francisco resident and author and teacher. She has written a couple of very good books and a new version of Golden Gate Gardening, where she talks specifically about the crops that do well in our foggier climates and ones that might be a little bit sketchy. And she also offers the planting times. So even on the coast side, we're not always, all of us are not always completely, covered in fog. We have sunnier, foggy climates, and we have foggier, foggy climates. And so she has a very exhaustive, comprehensive planting plan. So I encourage anybody who is trying to grow vegetables on the coast side to purchase that book. Arugula, okay, arugula is completely awesome. It does really well here on the coast side. You can grow multiple crops of arugula throughout the growing season. You can grow arugula in pots. It does very well. It's a fast growing member of the Brassica family. Beans, bush beans, okay, and pole beans. Now, dry beans don't do very well on the coast side unless you're in a very, very warm climate. Some areas, some of the farms back by Pescadero can grow, they can grow dry beans. But here, closer to the ocean, we're going to be looking at the green beans, okay? Also, there's a purple bean variety that does well here on the coast side. Beets are extraordinary. They do fantastic. Yellow beets, red beets. Broccoli, most broccolis will do very well here. Regular broccoli, head broccoli, I like De Ciccio because it is a cut and cut again type of broccoli. Once you cut the center, you get side shoots, and you can get side shoots up to several months, 6 or 7 months. Also, Chinese broccoli does very, very well, Gailan. Cabbages do terrific. In fact, we grow several crops of cabbage at the big garden every year, okay? Carrots do very well. Of course, chard. Now, I want to caution chard here or anywhere. The main growing season, even if it is foggy, is going to be a little bit warmer. Chard is prone to leaf miner. So that is, if anybody has had leaf miner with their chard, it can be a little bit frustrating, but it can be easily controlled in the summer months with row crop. Okay, with a row crop cover, okay, Agribon. It's a white row crop cover that you cover over your chard and your beets and your spinach, and that will reduce the leaf miner. Collards, also a member of the Brassica family, do extremely well. There's a couple of cucumbers that do well here on the coast side. We do a market more cucumber. Pickling cucumbers usually need a little bit more heat and they don't do as well. Again, I would advise if you want to grow cucumbers here on the coast, check out other options from Pam Pierce's book. Garlic does very well, planted in the fall, harvested in the summer. All kinds of greens do extraordinarily well. Mustard greens, bok choy, tatsoi, those all do very well here on the coast side. Lettuces, any kind of lettuce does well, and you can grow lettuce in pots, you can grow lettuce in your beds, right? You can grow leaf lettuces. If you want to grow head lettuce, it actually will do well. I like romaine does well here. Our kales do extraordinarily well. Sometimes the kales are prone to aphids, so make sure that your in-bed spacing is correct. And sometimes when the kales sort of at the end of their life, they do attract the aphids. Just get in there with, you can actually squirt off the aphids. We can talk about aphid control if we have time. Spring onions or scallions do very well on the coast. Bulb or storage onions take a little bit more work, but they can be done. Peas are terrific. We can grow peas, a couple of crops of peas, snap peas, snow peas, English peas, all do very well. Potatoes also do well. Pumpkins, okay, so smaller pumpkins will do well on the coast, and some winter squashes. We've had some luck with spaghetti squash in our big garden and also to butternut squash. The larger the squash or the larger the pumpkin, the more of a challenge it will be in our cooler climate because we don't really get enough heat, okay? But the smaller pumpkins, the sugar pie pumpkins, and the smaller butternut and the spaghetti squash will do quite well. Radishes, you can grow any kind of radish you want here. Spinach, you can grow any kind of spinach you want here. Some summer squashes will do well, and some will actually are very prone to powdery mildew, and we want to avoid them completely. So patty pan does fairly well. There are a couple of the yellow squashes. Crookneck squash kind of tends to become overwhelmed by powdery mildew. I grew a crookneck squash in a barrel in the sunniest part of my backyard, and it did pretty well, okay? But if I plant it down a little bit further where I get less sun and less heat, it doesn't do as well. So you can experiment a little bit there. There are several varieties of zucchini that are that do well on the coast side. That dark green zucchini does very well, and it does not succumb to powdery mildew as well. I mean, as easily as some of the other varieties. Strawberries amazingly do fantastic here. Blueberries do well, and most of the herbs do very well on the coast side. So this is not, like I said, not an exhaustive list, but this is a huge selection of things that will do well on the coast side. Now, one thing that is not on this list is tomatoes, okay? And that's usually something that people, oh, I want to grow tomatoes. I moved from Fremont 21 years ago. I used to grow tomatoes in my backyard all season long. I used to can, and it was just terrific. I come to the coast side, I plant tomatoes. My across the street neighbor she did laugh at me, actually. She goes, yeah, that's not going to work. And sure enough, she was right. Some cherry tomatoes do very well here, and that's really all I ever plant now are the cherry tomatoes. Right, so the small little red cherries do well. The yellow pears do pretty well, and Sun Gold, which is an F1 hybrid, does very well on the coast side. Again, you can experiment with tomatoes in maybe a greenhouse or a cold frame. But I find that messing with your tomatoes is, even if you can get a good size tomato to grow here on the coast side, it's usually not as sweet. It takes up a lot of garden space. They're easily susceptible to fungus, and can be kind of frustrating. Whereas all these other crops can give you so much satisfaction. And again, go to farmers market for your heirloom tomatoes and support your local farmers that are in the sunnier climates. That's my pitch for the farmers market. So once you get going planting, think about sustainability. All right, think about crops that you can grow for your own compost pile. Right, so we love sunflowers. Sunflowers grow well on the coast side. They're the big ones, the big mammoth sunflowers, not so much. But the littler ones, those are great. They make really great stalks that are great for this for the compost. But also, too, sunflowers attract bees and other beneficial insects, and that's very exciting. If you have children, you want to show them this whole idea of creating habitat for bees and other insects. Sunflowers are terrific. Now, it sounds kind of funny that you would plant corn, okay? But corn is a small corn. Not a GMO hybridized type of a corn, but we can grow short corn here, right? So corn is a great crop to grow for your compost. Fava beans and other legumes are also great to grow for soil fertility. Fava beans and other legumes, Australian pea and vetch, those are all going to be nitrogen fixers, so they're going to help with your soil. Consider growing cover crop mixes. Cover crop is a term, and we're talking a lot about cover crop even in mainstream agriculture now, that at the end of the growing season, planting cover crop over your soil not only will help preserve the soil itself in terms of water, but it will enhance your soil structure as well. And of course, like I just mentioned, crops for sustainability create habitat for your beneficial insects. So once you start thinking about how your you think of your garden beyond just growing food for you, but creating a little bit of habitat, creating an entire sort of sound ecological system in your own backyard. These things become fun and important, and can be things that you can add over time. And just most importantly, have fun. When you first start growing your own food, it seems kind of scary. You feel like, oh, I'm going to make too many mistakes. Oh, I don't have a green thumb. But it's just like learning anything. If you start, you make mistakes, that's just a mistake. That doesn't mean anything. Just continue, try again, try to figure out what happened. All right. And then try again. Okay. So this is me growing my broccoli. I love growing broccoli. I planted it in the springtime. I have broccoli all the way through the fall. So let's take a look about some of the resources. These are all the first few resources: Master Gardener Handbook, How to Grow Sustainable Vegetable Garden. Let's see. Seed companies. Okay, Peaceful Valley Farm Supply, groworganic.com. This is Peaceful Valley Farm Supply is up in Grass Valley. It's my favorite seed company. They have they're actually sold out of a lot of things right now, but if you want to buy some seed, go and take a look. They are very dedicated to non-GMO organic seed, and like I said, they're fairly close by. Territorial Seed Company is is a larger company. They have many organic seed options. They also have conventionally grown seed, so you have to make sure. I like open pollinated seed, so that's why I like Peaceful Valley Farm Supply. Territorial will also have hybrid. Seed Savers Exchange is also a good source for organic, non-GMO, open pollinated seed. Johnny's Seed Company is a huge seed company. You have to be a little bit careful with Johnny's Seed because they, while they do have plenty of organic, open pollinated seed, you have to be really watchful on the list because they do have quite a few hybrids, and which nothing wrong with hybrid necessarily, but it just depends on how they're grown. Renee's Garden also has quite a few seeds as well. There are countless YouTube videos on how to plant things. Okay, one thing I didn't put, but it's actually in a slide. Pam Pierce's book is not on this list. Okay, so I think that is it for the presentation. So do we have questions?
One question just came in. Can you grow plants from seeds that come from pickled peppers?
No. Once it's been preserved, the seed is no longer viable. Okay, so seeds, you can save seed from your crops. It's important then to keep them, make sure that they're kept in a cool, dry environment. But anything that has been sort of preserved or cooked or whatever is no longer viable. Any other questions?
That was the last one. We can stay on for a couple more minutes and see if anybody has any questions.
Okay.
Thank you for everyone that's attended, and thank you to our instructor, Loretta O'Brien.
Thank you. Oh no, I definitely appreciate it. Let's see. I'm just assuming that most of our people are co-siders, and so I do have the couple of slides that are divided for the warmer climates, so that people understand what a cool weather crop is versus a warm weather crop. Warm weather crops are going to be those crops that we can grow in the main growing season in the sunnier climates. Those boundaries are a little bit kind of meshed when we're talking about the coast side, because many of these quote warm weather crops we can actually grow in a cool weather environment. So our green beans and carrots and cucumbers and that kind of stuff. And then for the cool weather crops, these crops are going to grow very, very well in either early spring or in the fall for the warm weather, for the people in the warm weather climates.
Okay, great. And I do have a few more questions. So
Great.
any tricks for avoiding powdery mildew on peas in the Lindemar area?
Okay. So air. Okay. So the peas in peas can tend to get a little bit of powdery mildew, and so sometimes they get a little if you plant them too closely together, they will attract get the powdery mildew. Watering is very important for the peas. Make sure that you don't water the leaves. Okay, so water the soil only. They climb, they like to climb. So make sure that whatever climbing structure that you have allows them to kind of go straight up rather than wander around and pile on top of each other. And then if worse comes to worse, there is safer makes an organic fungicide that usually a little application of that will help as well.
Okay, great. And then a couple questions related to compost.
Yep.
One, do you need to water your compost bin? And the second one is if you have any more time or information on successful composting that you wanted to share.
Oh, sure. Absolutely. You do need to water your compost pile. Of course, this is now where I wish I had put my how to make a compost pile slide in. But anyway, so yes, a compost actually needs water. It needs air. It's going to need your greens, right? Or your immature your immature input, okay, so like your kitchen scraps, and then carbon, which is going to be your mature, right? So we have this idea of greens, right, and browns. So when you make your compost pile, you wanted to make sure that you layer your compost pile, and you can do that roughly by just depending on if you're going to use a bin or if you're going to create an open pile. The method is very, very similar. You want to make sure that the space for your compost pile is a minimum of 4 by 4. Okay, so smaller piles will tend not to decompose quickly enough, and larger piles, they're great, but they become a little bit unmanageable. So 4 by 4 space, either by a bin. Create a bin. You can create a bin with wood. You can get stackable bins. You can use chicken wire. You can use a variety of options. And again, Googling, you can find just tons of options. At the very bottom of your compost pile, put some branches of something or even corn stalks or sunflower stalks. We want to create a little bit of air at the bottom. Then you're going to apply a 4 to 6 inch layer of what we call browns or mature carbon, right? So that's going to be your straw. That's going to be your leaves. That can be pine needles, although pine needles I don't really like putting in the compost pile because they don't decompose very quickly. But if that's all you have, your corn stalks, if you have sunflower stalks, okay, those are all the browns, right? So leaves from deciduous trees, okay, so nice 4 to 6 inch layer, a little bit of water, okay, when you're building it. Next layer, 4 to 6 inches of your green materials. So that can be lawn cuttings if you still have a lawn, hopefully not, but lawn clippings, can be other crop residue from a plant that is, healthy, but, kind of done. Your kitchen scraps. Okay, so if you're hauling your kitchen scraps from your house, you can put them directly into your compost pile. You'll need a layer about 4 to 6 inches of that. And then you're going to layer another. So you're going to make this lasagna layer. You're going to water between each of those layers. The last layer on the very top, again, you're building a pile that's about 3 to 4 inches high. I'm sorry, 3 to 4 feet high. Okay. And then you're going to water it, and you're going to top it off with straw. And if you have a little bit of soil that you know has living organisms in it, top it off with that. Okay, then you're going to cover it. Right now, you can have an open pile. That's not a problem. But if you have a cover, I have the BioStacks. I have 4 of those at home. I've been using them for years. I like to cover them. Keeps the raccoons from visiting. And so that's really helpful. Now, you do not need to put your compost pile in sun, okay? The heat that is generated in a compost pile is generated by the microbes that are the actual metabolic activity of the microbes in your compost pile. Your compost pile will heat up. If you get a compost a thermometer, which you can buy, Peaceful Valley Farm Supply has them, you're going to take a look at that, and it'll actually tell you if it's heating up. Right, so we're looking at trying to get that pile over 130 degrees. It won't probably get in very hot. It probably won't get any hotter than 130, maybe 150 at the most, right? And that will last about 3 days. You can turn your pile. Now, honestly, at the big garden, we don't have enough volunteers to turn our piles. So once we make a pile, we hardly ever turn it, or we turn it maybe once. The more frequently you turn your pile, the quicker your compost pile will mature. So turn your pile once the temperature is now dropping, right? Now it's dropping down to 100 or so. Turn your pile, water your pile, all right? And then you can get some more heat. After you turn it twice, just let it decompose. It'll decompose till about 1/3 to 1/2 of the original volume. How do you know your compost is done? When you put your hand in there and you pull out the compost, and it smells like a forest floor. Now you know it's ready. Okay, and then you can go ahead and use it. Does that help?
I think so. Another question. If the compost dries out, does it mean it's no good? Can you revive it if you water it?
Yeah, so if your compost pile completely dries out, and so what you've done now is the microbial activity now has gone down, turn it and water it, and it will very likely revive.
Okay, great. And one of our attendees is from Pleasanton, so I'm assuming they might have got some of the warmer weather crops from one of those slides. And that was just a comment.
Okay. Oh, okay. Yeah. So if you're in that warmer climate, well, let's see. Oh, here we go. Right. Those are our warm weather crops. Right now, depends on what the temperature is in Pleasanton. I'm assuming this is May, so we're approaching 80s. Certain things are not going to do very well right now unless you shade net them. So your lettuces and spinach and sometimes even kale will get really tiny, or they won't grow very well. But you can put shade net over them. And shade net is available by the foot. Peaceful Valley Farm Supply sells it. Many other garden supply companies sell shade net. You can buy shade net in different percentages. We use a 30% here on the coast side when we're transplanting. Probably about a 30 to 40% shade net will be helpful if you want to grow some of those cooler crops right now. But I always just say, hey, you know what? If you're in the warmer climate, grow all this other stuff first, and then in the fall you can grow the cool weathers, or you can find little shady spots in your garden for your lettuces and your spinaches.
Okay, great. And that was our last question.
Okay. All right, everybody. Well, happy growing, and let's see, I'm going to stop share here. And certainly if you are ever on the coast side and you want to take a look at Pacifica Gardens, we're in the Lindemar area. Feel free to go to our website, pacifica-gardens.org. You can email me, and we are still sort of in the closed category due to the pandemic, but we will be opening up to visitors as we can. So
Thank you, Loretta.
thank you.
Take care, everyone.
Take care.